It's Rolling by Limp Bizkit. That's quite an old joke. Hello, my name is Jonathan Palfrey and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe as it massively helps out. Now, I'm continuing my A7 IV videos here as once again, from the first video I did on the A7 IV, it provoked a lot of conversations, and one of the things was, what about rolling shutter? Is there a difference between the rolling shutter in 4K and in HD? Now, the Sony a7S III and the FX3 have incredibly good rolling shutter performance. Hardly any in the image whatsoever. In fact, they are pretty much the best camera out there when it comes to rolling shutter performance. Only, global shutter cameras like the Komodo do better because obviously they are global shutters. However, when it comes to the A7 IV, unfortunately, those improvements that we've seen in the a7S III and FX3 haven't passed over. And that's the question of how bad is it? So I've just done a very simple test here where I've got my Nanlite light stick on a light stand. Gives us a very nice clean straight image to look at, and then I've just panned left and right violently with the tripod, and it's given us probably what we expected. In the 4K 25 frames, that is pretty bad rolling shutter. As you freeze the frame here and look at that image, they are not straight. The picture in the background is clearly not straight, and in this scenario that is pretty bad rolling shutter. It's something that we've seen bad with the A7 III, and it seems like the A7 IV also has a pretty bad rolling shutter problem in this scenario. Now, when you go to 50 frames, obviously that crops in on the sensor. Does it improve things? Maybe there's a higher readout. Perhaps. It looks a little bit better. It's hard to tell whether that's just because of the slightly different frame. I would say there's definitely a little improvement there. It must be reading slightly faster because it's cropping in on that sensor, and you're seeing less rolling shutter. So maybe the answer is to shoot crop sensor on this camera if you don't want too much rolling shutter. Maybe that's the answer. But what about HD? Does HD solve the problem? Going to a lower resolution, does that change the way that the camera actually reads from the sensor? And does that mean we see an improved rolling shutter performance? And I have to say, when looking at it and comparing it from the still, yes, much improved. The HD seems to have much better rolling shutter performance than the 4K. Which is good to see. It's good to see that, that spare processing power perhaps is being put to good use. I mean, it probably does conclude, as in my previous video talking about resolutions, that it's definitely not a full 7K sample down to HD image when you get to this point. The HD image is definitely being taken from line skipping or some other method. But in terms of rolling shutter performance, that's pretty impressive, and I would say not too bad. Now, of course, when you look at that 4K rolling shutter, it doesn't look good in this scenario. When you're doing these violent whip pans, that is a pretty bad rolling shutter issue that, like in the 6K of the Blackmagic, is not great. And it's something that you'll have to try and deal with and get around when shooting. And it's a shame that a new camera coming out has still rolling shutter issues that are this bad. However, that said, is this a realistic scenario on most of the shoots that you'll be doing? That's the question you've got to ask yourself, and whether this would be a problem for you or not. So yes, if you're doing violent whip pans like this, it doesn't look good. If you're shooting stuff perhaps maybe out of the window of a car, that wouldn't look that great. Or if you're doing certain types of sport, things like cricket, something like that, this obviously would not be acceptable. It just wouldn't look that nice on camera at all. But if you're just doing, say, corporate work and you're doing a bit of slow motion, it's people, and perhaps there aren't too many straight lines, or at least not when you're doing lots of fast movement, then I don't know if there's that much of an issue with this footage. When I look at other shots on this camera and you're just using it in normal scenarios where you're not doing heavy whip pans, I don't think the rolling shutter is that bad actually. Yes, obviously if you have flashing or anything like that, it's going to be noticeable. But actually in normal use case scenarios, talking heads like this, I really don't think that rolling shutter is that bad. So perhaps, maybe in scenarios where you do need fast whip pans and things like sport and things, maybe you just have to shoot in HD to get around the rolling shutter. But In other scenarios where rolling shutter isn't going to be so noticeable, probably the 4K isn't going to be a problem whatsoever. I'd love to know what you think on that. Is this a deal breaker when it comes to the A7 IV for you? Personally, I don't think it is. I think this is something that in a very sort of limited and niche scenarios, yes, it would be a problem. However, in many other places, it wouldn't be at all. And I think for the most people who are buying this camera, who are going to probably be doing a lot of YouTubing, maybe taking a holiday, doing low-end corporate work, things like that, the rolling shutter really isn't a problem. And the A7 IV is such an incredibly good camera in so many other areas, especially for the price, that I think it's something that you can deal with as a small compromise when using this camera. I'd love to know what you think, so please leave a comment down below. Please like and subscribe as well if you found this video useful. I'll be doing plenty more videos with this camera, as well as the Canon C70, so you compare it to that, the FX3, the Blackmagic 6K Pro, all the brands I try and cover on this channel, at least ones I can get hold of anyway. There will be plenty more content to come. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.